So now we come to Schopenhauer's proof that there can be no God. Not only that there is no God, but that the whole notion of God is preposterous. It's nonsense, given our notion of cause and effect. So that's the crucial thing. As we're doing this, we have to remember that because we're grounding everything in experience and experience alone, and cause and effect that comes out of that notion is just this necessary ordering of the cause always occurring before the effect and immediately before the effect. It's this that's going to allow us to prove that there can be no God. Well, why? First, everyone would agree that if there is a God, then God is the first cause, or at least could be the first cause of the universe. The crucial notion of first cause, if you remember, is the notion of a being that is the cause of everything else, but doesn't need a cause, has existence or change in itself. It's the source of all change and existence, but doesn't need anything to bring it into existence or to give it the power to change things. Thus, first cause means the very beginning, a cause that is the cause of everything else, but needs no cause itself. Such a being would have to be eternal. I hope you can see this, because if it wasn't eternal, it would have a beginning, and therefore would either come from nothing or need a cause, and therefore not be the first cause. So, if there is a God, then God is a first cause, or at least could be. But what Schopenhauer wants to prove to us is, given our concept of cause and effect, not only is there no first cause, there can be no such thing as a first cause. So what we're going to spend the rest of this time proving is that particular point, that there is no first cause, that there can be no such first cause, and therefore that there can be no God, because if there was a God, there would be a first cause, but there can be no first cause, therefore there is no God. There can be no God. In fact, we can make it even stronger. So why can't there be a first cause? Well, we start with an obvious fact, like Aquinas and Aristotle started, that there are things that have a beginning, that there are changes that occur. So let's take something very simple, like the starting of a fire or the explosion of a bomb. Some of you might have heard the recent news event of the mall in Florida blowing up. And they have traced the cause of that explosion to a gas leak. Now, the gas leak in and of itself can't be the cause of the explosion, because the gas leak can occur for a certain amount of time before it explodes. So just the gas leak alone wouldn't be sufficient, wouldn't be enough to say, oh, that's the cause of the explosion. Well, what else would you need? You would need the presence of this gas together with some kind of spark or heat source that then causes the gas to ignite. So let's call that the cause of the gas explosion. Once we have the cause of the gas explosion, then that explains not only why the gas explosion occurred, but why it occurred at that time. This is crucial. Let's say, for example, the gas explosion occurred at 3 p.m. in the afternoon on July 3rd. Well, because that's when it occurred, the cause must have occurred immediately before the effect. We saw that the only way we can distinguish cause and effect is that the cause is the thing that the minute the cause occurs, the effect immediately follows. So the cause of the gas explosion had to occur immediately before. So what does that mean then? Well, that means that if the cause had occurred earlier, if the gas leak had occurred earlier, and if the spark that ignited the leaked gas occurred earlier, then the explosion would have occurred earlier. So if it had occurred at 3 p.m. if all the factors that were enough to cause the explosion had occurred 1 day earlier, then the explosion would have occurred 1 day earlier. Thus, if the cause had occurred 1,000,000 years earlier, then the effect would have occurred 1,000,000 years earlier. So what does this tell us? This tells us that every cause of an effect that occurs in time therefore has to have a beginning, doesn't it? Because the cause is such that the minute the cause exists, the effect must follow immediately after. So, therefore, the cause couldn't have existed any earlier than it actually existed for the explosion to have occurred on, hypothetically, that date. So what does that mean? That means that every cause and effect that occurs in time, the cause must have a beginning. But we saw that our whole notion of cause and effect is of a temporal relationship where the cause always occurs just before the effect, that we have no concept of some timeless cause and effect relationship, that the cause-effect relationship is a time relationship. And so therefore every cause and effect relationship is something that occurs at a certain time. Thus, every cause must have a beginning. But if every cause must have a beginning, and everything that has a beginning must have a cause, then it follows that every cause must have a cause. So the minute we know here's the cause of the explosion, we also know that whatever is the cause of that explosion must have had a cause, because it had to begin at a certain period of time. So what this means is that every time we find a cause for something, we have to ask, what is the cause of that? And once we find the cause of that, because that had to have a beginning, then we had to have a cause of that. And so every cause must have a cause, which means there can never be a cause that has no cause, that doesn't need a cause. Therefore, there can be no first cause. But if there can be no first cause, then there can be no God, because God at least has to have the possibility of being the thing that causes everything else, but needs no cause, God's self. And so therefore, if there can be no first cause, then there can be no God. So our very concept of cause and effect requires that every cause must have a cause. And this is where you originally got this idea that if God is the cause of the universe, then what caused God? You get it from Schopenhauer's idea of cause and effect, which he got from Hume and from the empiricists, that our only sensible notion of cause and effect is one that requires the cause to occur immediately before the effect. So now, why doesn't simultaneous cause make sense when we have an illustration like the sun giving off light or a light bulb giving off light? Doesn't that seem to be an instance where you have something that occurs at the same time and we can distinguish the cause and effect? Schopenhauer would say no, that's an illusion. What you really see at the moment that you see is not the light that was immediately caused by the light bulb, but the light that was caused by a previous state of the action of the electricity of the light bulb. What's happening in the sun is a process that occurs over time, and it looks as if it's occurring at the same time, because at each time that you are witnessing the light, you're witnessing no break in the giving off or the radiance of the light, and so therefore you mistake the present radiance as a product of the present state of the sun. But if you thought about it, you would realize that's not the case, that the light takes a certain amount of time to travel to your eyes, and that therefore the light you're actually seeing isn't a product of the present state of the sun, but of a previous state of the sun. And so even that illustration isn't a real example of simultaneous cause and effect, or of an eternal cause having an eternal effect. Every cause and effect, insofar as we're able to understand it as a real cause and effect relationship, has to have that structure that the cause immediately occurs before the effect. Thus, if the cause occurs earlier, the effect would occur earlier. Pretend that God is the cause of the universe. Then, therefore, the minute God exists, the universe exists. But God is eternal by definition. So it would follow that every event in the universe is eternal. If God is the eventual cause of the explosion, then that explosion occurred an infinity ago, an eternity ago. But that's absurd. It occurred at 3 p.m. at that time. And so therefore, the fact that there are things that occur in time and that causes must always occur in time requires that there can never be an eternal cause of everything. Every cause must have a beginning, and therefore every cause must itself be the effect of some previous cause. There can be no first cause, and therefore there can be no creator God.